Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Good AI conversation. My name is Caroline Lair, and I'm the founder of the Good AI. We are running the very first community of AI startups, talent, and experts leveraging the power of AI to address the sustainable development goals. We select members and we provide them with visibility through events and content, workshop, access to talent, jobs, investors, and corporates. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that I guess we all have in mind these days, especially after a very tough summer of climate extremes and catastrophes. The climate crisis has never been so real. But we want to believe that this is a race we can win and that the AI community has a role to play to mitigate and build successful adaptive strategies. And to conduct this conversation, I am honored to have Priya Danti by my side today, who is not only a PhD student in computer science and public policy at Carnegie Mellon University, working at the intersection of machine learning and climate change mitigation, but also the co-founder and chair of Climate Change AI. I will let you, Priya, tell us a bit more about your work and this project.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Caroline. So yes, of course, we're here today to talk about climate change. So as especially underscored by the latest IPCC report, the human effects on the climate are, unequivocal, and we're seeing increasingly severe effects in terms of storms, droughts, fires, flooding, and so forth. And the effects of climate change will be felt everywhere with disproportionate impacts on marginalized communities across the globe. This means we need to act very fast. We need to hit net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, for example. And this is despite the fact that emissions are still increasing each year, which means that we as a society need to rally all of the tools, approaches, everything we can to really address this challenge meaningfully. And machine learning can be one such tool with applications across things like forecasting electricity supply and demand on the electric power system, to remote sensing of emissions, to optimizing transportation systems, to facilitating the discovery of next generation batteries, and of course, many more cool applications that we'll hear about today from today's entrepreneurs. And before we dive into the conversation, I really briefly want to introduce Climate Change AI. So Climate Change AI is a nonprofit organization that aims to foster the impactful use of machine learning to address climate change. We have various resources, events, and funding programs that for those who are in the audience who are interested in thinking more about or working in this area, I'd encourage you to check out. Notably, we currently have open a call for research funding. So we have up to $150,000 per project available for projects using AI to address climate change, with applications due October 15th. We also have some upcoming webinars and happy hours. And we also have a major workshop to be held in December virtually at NeurIPS, one of the largest conferences on machine learning, in which different individuals from the community will be presenting work that they're doing at this intersection, and which is also a very good opportunity to meet other people in this area. So for those who are interested in following up on some of the topics that are discussed during today's webinar, I'd encourage you to check out the Climate Change AI website, www.climatechange.ai. And to sign up for the newsletter about future events. So little quick pitch, but very, very excited to hear from our entrepreneurs today.
Great, thanks so much, Priya. And now we're going to move to our guest, and I must say we feel very lucky to that they have accepted to be here today, despite of their busy schedules. So thanks so much for this. So we have here 4 brilliant founders of some of the most innovative AI startups in the field of climate intelligence, climate modeling, carbon offset, and carbon accounting. We're going to go through a short presentation of each of these guests, followed by a 30-minute conversation, and we'll finish with a Q&A session. And so you can basically ask all the questions you want to our guest. The chat is available at the right of the YouTube page, and you can start to ask questions from now. I will leave now Priya together with Michal that will get with us here, and we're listening to you, ladies.
Yes, so I'm super duper excited to introduce Dr. Michal Nachmany, who is an international climate policy and governance expert with a background in law, finance, and multinational project management. She is currently the founder and CEO of Climate Policy Radar, a not-for-profit climate startup that maps global climate policy using AI. She also spent a decade at the Grantham Research Institute at the London School of Economics, where she led work on structured data sets and tools supporting national legislation and policy and low carbon investment. So Dr. Nachmany, very excited to hear a little bit about your work. Oh, and I think you're muted, actually.
I should have known to unmute myself after 2 years doing this, right? Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, Good AI and Climate Change AI, and welcome to everyone on the stream and watching this later. My name is Michal Nachmany, and for the last 10 years or so, I've been trying to create better evidence bases to support decision-making on climate change policies. Climate change policies are the make or break of everything climate. Whether you want to have an electric vehicle, you're reliant on policies, both to determine the price of that and to see if you have a charger in your road, or to see if you can charge them when you're going somewhere else. Will the train to Edinburgh be more expensive than the plane to Edinburgh? All of these things depend on policies. And the thing is, when we think about policies, everyone has to make them, from national governments through states and cities and corporations as well. And because we have to move on so many fronts at once, and because we have to move so quickly, finding out what works is a critical thing that we need to do. And the way that policy data is out there in the world today is really, really messy. And the idea of Climate Policy Radar is to aggregate all of that information and put it in a place where everyone can find out who's doing what, and eventually we can find out what works. The idea is very simple. Let's go and scrape and analyze using NLP climate policy documents. These are laws and action plans and strategies by national and subnational governments, again, cities later, corporations later. Structure them in a way that is useful, but also very, very flexible, so that a policymaker that wants to say, what happens around smart grids in mid-sized cities, will be able to look at a menu of options and choices of things that have already been tried. Someone who wants to say, how does adaptation to floods happen in a certain area or in a certain climate, can look at a menu of options. That can also be used, that kind of evidence base can also be used to hold policymakers accountable, can also be used to support financial decisions, where and how to move money, can also be used by corporates who are subject to regulation and engage with regulation on a variety of levels, and of course can be used by citizens who are really critical parts of this story. I'll pause here and we'll move on, and I'm sure we'll have lots of interesting discussions shortly.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think many people often ask the question of whether they can address climate change via tech or via policy. And I think your work is a great example of the fact that tech can, in fact, be a very powerful tool in informing the kinds of policy decisions that different players can make. So thank you. I'm going to hand it over to Carolyn.
Yes, moving further, we are here with Diego. Diego, you're a serial entrepreneur and environmentalist, born and raised in Argentina. And with your company, Pachamama, you're using AI and satellite data to verify and monitor carbon sequestration by forest. Am I correct?
That's right, yes. Yeah, so the intention to create this company was based upon the insight that forest and other natural ecosystems are such an essential carbon sink, and not only do we have an incredible opportunity to sequester gigaton levels of CO2 from the atmosphere by restoring ecosystems, by planting trees, by letting oceans restore. But also, we continue to be at grave danger of the emissions that are produced by deforestation around the world, right? Places like the Amazon rainforest, the Congo forest, Indonesia continues to be under very intense push from illegal deforestation and legal deforestation sometimes. So we wanted to use the latest technologies, including all the wide availability of satellite imagery that we have today coming from private and public institutions, and then apply machine learning to process all that imagery at scale and be able to do predictions about key aspects of this field that are required in order to finance reforestation and conservation. So to give you an example of some of the applications, we are able to train a deep learning algorithm to make predictions about how much carbon is being sequestered today on a particular forest. We combine satellite, LiDAR, and ground truth coming from foresters around the world. We are also able to predict likely deforestation looking at historical data. We're able to predict the risk of fire, and we are applying all these different models to evaluate forest projects that have received carbon credits and that might benefit from further financing, but also to help originate new forest projects, right? If we are going to solve climate change, we need thousands of new projects that will protect and restore forest. So very excited to be applying these technologies.
Thanks so much, Diego. And you also raised a very nice 15 million Series A in May. Congratulations on this.
Thank you. Yes, we raised a great round of funding. Actually, $24 million we have raised in total so far from Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is Bill Gates initiated climate fund, from Amazon, Lower Carbon, and several other climate-focused investors.
Congratulations. Now heading to Corinne and Priya.
Okay, yeah, so Corinne is the founder of Carbometrics and is a very successful serial entrepreneur before this, both CEO and building from scratch Vivendi Canal Olympia, the first network of movie theaters in Africa, and also founding shiftyourjob.org, the French reference site for candidates looking for a company with a climate purpose. So very impressive background here. Corinne, love to hear more about Carbometrics.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm delighted to be here today with fellow entrepreneurs engaged in the most important challenge of our century. Thanks, Caroline and Priya, for making this possible. So what we do at Carbometrics is we are doing our part by building the platform of carbon performance of any company. We want to help and guide financial flows toward the transition to a lower carbon economy and guide financial flows toward the most virtuous companies. So be it credit, investment, corporate procurement, citizen savings. So money has to flow to low carbon. So, but the problem is company emissions data are not available, unstructured, and difficult to compare. So, and for a company, carbon footprint is the first step to decarbonize. If you want to improve, you first have to count and then you monitor. Maybe I have one question for the audience. Has anybody participated to the carbon footprint of a company, and what experience and what do they think of the experience? So maybe I leave 10 seconds. So
yeah, and yes, and for audience members, please feel free to leave answers to that question in the YouTube comments, and hopefully we can also come back to them later on in the panel to see what we got.
So if you have done a carbon footprint of a company, well, it's very tedious, it's time consuming, and it's often not meaningful because you spend weeks counting stuff that are in no way material to your company impact on climate change. So what we are doing with Carbometrics is we are doing two things. First, doing a quick and easy estimator so that company can assess in minutes, not weeks, their carbon footprint and compare themselves with peers. The second thing we do is that we are building a database of all this company emission data, and we help banking and financial institutions comply with regulation, because more and more financial institutions are constrained with more reporting, and they have no data for small and medium companies. So what we are doing is providing them not only on large public enterprise carbon footprint, but also hundreds of thousands of SME. And to do that, we compile a lot of data, not only what the company can input in the database, but also heterogeneous data sets from public publication of companies, websites, state websites. And we need to combine this heterogeneous data, which needs a lot of algorithm and data science. What we do also is we focus on company material emission, and we estimate missing data with algorithm. So this is how we use AI in our model.
Fantastic. And maybe before we go to the next introduction, we got one question in the YouTube, which is, what are the largest contributors to a company's carbon footprint that you measure at Carbometrics? If you had to just give a quick highlight.
Well, I presume we have a lot of tech entrepreneurs or people in the software industry. So it really, the first answer is that it depends on your activity. So this is how we built our methodology. If you are in the SaaS, it's really about, if you are an international company, probably transport, airplanes. And second thing that is common to everybody is emissions from the cloud usage and computer. So these are three main emission categories for a SaaS company.
Awesome. Thanks, Corinne. And super exciting that you measure also scope 3 emissions, which are, many companies say we can't act on because we don't have the data. I love that your company is addressing that problem.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So to last hand it over back to Caroline to introduce Max.
Hello, Max. How are you? So, Max, you are the co-founder and COO of ClimateAI, who also recently raised a 12 million Series A back in July. Congrats. And prior to this startup, you were already an entrepreneur in the agribusiness. You have an impressive academic background, Bachelor of Math at Harvard, MBA and Master of Science in Environment Engineering at Stanford. Today with ClimateAI, you use AI to predict a physical risk of climate change on infrastructure and help investors, insurers, and governments develop climate-resilient strategies. Can you tell us a bit more, please?
Yes, of course. First of all, thank you so much, Caroline, and everybody for inviting us. So a little bit about ClimateAI. We are currently focused in the agricultural space. So we do climate analytics in terms of how you will be impacted by climate from the next season to the next decade, and how that will impact both your supply chain, your operations, and your strategic planning. For an example of a very specific one might be, say, almonds, and how are the chilling hours during the winter in California going to be changing over these next coming decades? What's the forecast for the next season and the next year? So that as a producer or someone in the supply chain, you can look at adaptation, mitigation strategies around all of these climate impacts. So when it comes to AI, we've deeply studied the global climate models, both in terms of how to better ensemble them, how to better post-process them, for extremes, for different impact functions towards the agricultural space over the next coming decades. And we've also built neural networks to actually capture all of these global climate simulations over now not just decades, but thousands of years of pre-industrial control simulations, and try to build a neural network that can capture some of the physical components of the climate's behavior. We then fine-tune those models using transfer learning to try to get improved subseasonal, seasonal forecasts, and trying to bring all of this data to be used in the best way to inform operational, strategic, and next year decisions. So that's our main use of machine learning. We work with large agro-industrial companies to help them better inform, communicate, and address all of the climate impacts to their businesses and supply chain. So that's a little bit about what we do. Would be delighted to chat further and look forward to questions both from everybody and from.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Carol.
Thanks so much, Max. So thanks to everyone, and I'm gonna have you all back with me right now. Everyone's here. Great. So thanks so much, everyone, for all of your introduction. And now Priya and I, we have a few questions for you around tech aspects, scalability, sustainability. But this is also, and above all, your conversation. So don't hesitate to ask questions to each other and to put your thoughts on the table. So we're going to start, or maybe you have questions already to ask to each other. Otherwise, we're super happy to start with our questions.
All right, in that case, let's dive right in. So I guess the first question is, so all of your companies, as we just heard, deal with producing some kind of insight based on a large amount of data that's available at scale. But especially given the short timescales at which we have to deal with the climate crisis, that insight needs to translate to action, and also on again, short timescales. So how do you actually contend with that in your work, sort of making sure that your analysis and insights actually translate to action? And that's open floor, so anybody feel free to jump in.
Let me get a head start on that. I have two answers for that. The first thing is that we're talking about insights, but sometimes merely making the data available for consumption is action in itself, because you're supporting processes that have otherwise would have happened, either wouldn't have happened or would have happened inefficiently. Part of what we're doing is, of course, putting the data out as open data resources, which means that we're limiting or reducing data asymmetries, which are a driver of climate change and inequality in general. And I consider putting out that data out there, even without insights, a really significant part of climate action in itself. That means that anyone can then use the data in order to derive their own insights based on their own modeling, based on their own needs and circumstances. Anyone can then use the data. Ooh, that's exciting. I heard myself twice. Yeah, so that's the one thing. The second thing is that putting out data or even insights out there is not something that can exist in a vacuum. And without knowledge brokers that bring out that data to those who need it in order to data, knowledge, information. I mean, take your pick on the hierarchy of how we consume things that make us make different decisions, right? Which is what we're talking about. Knowledge brokers are the ones who will take it out there. Sometimes they will be paid consultants by governments. Sometimes they will be your accounting firm who's looking at what others are doing and how to do things better. All of those things have to go out through the right channels. So investing in those channels and not just saying, I'm a tech company, I'm going to put something out there and hope for the world to use it. I think that's not good enough for all of us operating in that climate space. So conversations like this that create connections and networks are critical, but also working on that from a policy angle and from a networking angle is really, really critical to our job and I think to all of your jobs as well.
maybe might add, as someone who builds on top of other people's work, of Michal's work, of like the Pangeo network, the movements to move a lot of the climate data to AWS, to move all of the climate data to the Google Earth Engine and others. Yeah, I can't highlight enough how much of building the fundamental tools for this next step in climate analytics, in climate research, making the data available in a way that machine learning can actually be used, that it's post-processed, that it's clean. It is such a big task and so fundamentally important. In terms of making it more available, more like insight-driven, I think often it's around means or around like standard deviations. One of the work that we've done is about trying to build risks and alerts around industry or client-specific thresholds around what does 20 probability of temperatures above 20 degrees or 25 degrees mean for someone? How do multiple risks or multiple variables interact together to guide a decision-making process? And it's and when it builds across what many people have been building for decades in terms of fundamental data and data tools, and there's still a lot of work to be done. But there's a lot of work to be done on the impact functions to connect this last mile of climate to decisions or climate to the ability of insight. That's a very interesting space.
If I may add to Michal and Diego, is it Diego? Yeah, I can't see. I agree with Michal on the power of open source and transparency. We believe the same at Carbometrics. That's why we want to put this database in place so that everybody can access the data. But the second thing is that we want to make sure people focus on what is material. I see too many companies, doing their carbon footprint and counting what's not, material for climate. Everything is in scope 3, like Priya mentioned. So it's upstream in your value chain, how you buy stuff, whether you use airplanes or things like that. And usually companies, they don't act on these categories of emission, while this is where the largest lever lies. So yeah, that's our two, main focus at Carbometrics, making it data available widely, and second, focus on what is material and not on, anecdotic stuff.
I guess I can jump to comment that in our case, the data that we have been produced has already helped drive several millions of dollars into forest restoration and conservation. And what I'm really impatient about is how can we use this data to help originate new projects, right? So all the projects that we have helped drive funding to are projects that existed before Pachamama, right? And thanks to our data, now they get more funding and they can scale. But again, the urgency of helping stop deforestation and help restoration, because also trees take time to grow, right? So the best, as the saying goes, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is now, right? So my urgency is always how can we accelerate our analysis and put the data in front of the right people so that more funding can go. But it's really rewarding to see how those insights and the application of those technologies can actually drive millions of dollars in the near term.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks all for those great insights. And yeah, a very common theme is sort of open source, make things available and make sure that it actually gets translated to various actors. On the flip side, there are many cases in which when actually doing this work, right, when actually doing work at the intersection of climate change and AI, access to data can sometimes be an issue in even starting that work. For instance, Climate Change AI put out a data set wish list about a year ago, trying to highlight different gaps that may exist for certain problems in this space. So a question is, has access to data ever been an issue in your work? And what would you say to maybe policymakers, private players, civil society, others who are trying to shape this landscape about how they can actually facilitate this open data landscape and maybe pitfalls they should also be looking out for when doing that?
Yeah, I can jump on that because, in our case, the training data that we use, the ground truth that we use is field plot measurements of trees, from around the world that we use to then calibrate the algorithms. And there is so much data that exists because every country is required by the United Nations to do a national forest inventory. So almost every country who signed the Paris Agreement has foresters collecting data, but that data is generally under closed doors, very difficult to access. We have been able to get access to the national forest inventories of several countries in South America, but if we want to train models for Africa, Asia, and the rest of the world, we need access to those data sets. And of course, there are certain people that are protective of those data sets, or just people that don't have the capacity to share it easily. So yes, our message is always, look, that data, opening up that data can actually help your country get financing to protect and restore forests. That's money, climate money, that is going to create jobs, and it's going to create, it's going to help the local economies, right? So I think we have to convey that message that, first, that hiding data doesn't have any benefit. Second, that opening up data can actually drive economic value for countries and institutions. And thirdly, that it's actually, to me, ethically wrong in front of such an important crisis as climate change to be not sharing data. I think we should all be, feeling the sense of responsibility for that.
I want to add that sometimes the drivers are not economic. I agree with every word that Diego said. But adding on top of that, that sometimes the drivers for not sharing data are not economic and not a result of competition, but a result of low capacities in countries, a result of documents that are in PDFs, that are in weird libraries on some civil servant's laptop, or in the central library somewhere with no real access to them. And the thought about, even in the global north, doing IT projects is something that is really, really scary, and people still are not really sure how to do that and how to arrange their universities' libraries or whatever. If you think about governments or cities and the resources for that, and low internet connections, and all of those things are also impediments to that. So a real important part of this, of the story of opening up data, is the story of capacity building and financing of open resources, and the ability to have support in order to make those processes better. And that is a really critical element to understand. I think that not always is it not for the right, for the wrong reasons of competitiveness. Sometimes people just don't know how to do it, and like everything with climate, we really need to support the interoperability of the data. Is, I think, another really important piece. The fact that you say tomato and I say tomato and we don't understand each other, and of course we're never going to get to uniform definitions of everything. We're currently defining sectors, right? There's so many ways to define sectors relevant to climate change. The point is making sure that everything can talk to each other in a useful way, that even if you say energy and I say electricity, then we understand that we can find each other somewhere in the dark and understand what's common and what's not common. So building those frameworks is, I think, a common effort. And having data providers talk to each other is a critical component in that, which is why having the four of us today on one screen is a really good thing, which I'm sure will lead to collaborations and make at least our data compatible with each other. So the more the merrier of those collaborations.
I might jump in that I completely agree that the standardization of just creating climate standards is not something that's truly happened yet. Say you want to go and play with weather or climate data, you might need to download net CDF packages that seem to be the main form climate scientists interact with it, making things in more common formats, in more Pythonic, more generally accessible is something that has long ways to go. I think there's been a lot of tools built and that there's been a lot of progress. But there's still like a long way to go. Data visualization, and not just communicating the data itself, but the context around the data is something that we've found that we need to personally work on like just contextualization of data continues to be important. Simplification of just the time needed for a person to get up and running. We've built like little hackathons or tools that people can start and create a simple like seasonal forecast for El Nino. And that allows people to sort of like get their hands and start interacting with the data. Ground truth weather stations, the standards are crazy across all of the weather station data providers that makes interacting with private weather station data really difficult and complex. So there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of people, a lot of software engineers, data scientists, policymakers, just all the hands that we can get would be put to really good use, because there's just so much to be done on the climate tech and climate tech industry.
All right, we may, yes? No, okay. We may move to another topic that is around scalability. And looking at you guys, it seems that there is a key challenge for startups in the climate intelligence and carbon accounting category, especially. The fact is that you need to build offerings that are truly productized and scalable. And you facing potential customers that always have unique sets of climate questions and objectives based on their particular situation, on their geographic footprint, physical assets, business priorities, and so on. And as a result, it seems that you will need to build some kind of bespoke professional service heavy solution for each customer. So I was wondering, for instance, Max and Corinne, how do you contend with these challenges?
So I think the last mile is always going to be a challenge. I think part of a solution could be sort of like a Salesforce model, where the foundational are built in the way that sort of like Salesforce built the foundation for building apps around sales rep data, private company data, and every company had tweaks or little changes that needed to be made to make climate data or more specific to them. But as long as we can have a foundational tool, we can create an open source community or a Salesforce model that allows people to, so that building a climate app is no longer a $10 million endeavor. Hopefully in 5 years, it might be a $1 million endeavor, and hopefully in 10 years, it can be $100K or $10,000 endeavor. So we want to really like lower the bar in terms of what does it mean to build a climate app. And the way that we do it is by creating abstract components and starting building on top of each other sequentially, so that that bar is continuously lowered and lowered. Because at this point, it's a high bar, and that's not acceptable. And building a climate app should be something that high schoolers, college students, people in hackathons can do with relatively low resources in a relatively shorter amount of time. And that's where we need to get to. That's where we want to get to.
May I jump in? Yeah.
Sure.
So regarding scalability of our model and how we tackle it, that the first component, which is the quick and easy estimator, is very standardized. It's very hard to do because each sector has different emission categories that count. So it's hard to do, but once it's there, there's a standard for carbon footprint, GHG protocol or ISO or bill on carbon in France. So then it's standard. As for the database, of course, once we put the data on company carbon footprint, carbon performance, ranking, and so on, of course, we imagine there can be many use cases. So we are building the database the more flexible we can, but we don't know, the use that can be done, and we'll see as we move on. The first target market are the financial institutions that need reporting data. So we know this use case. I hope there will be more use cases that can be a company procurement, can be citizens that want to invest in companies that are virtuous in terms of climate. But we'll have to adapt, and this is a daily job of a startup. So we'll see how it goes. We can't hear you, Caroline.
I'm back. Thank you. I was also wondering, despite the considerable potential for AI for climate action, seems that the adoption seems low. And I was wondering, which are the barriers do you identify that we haven't already covered with your customer, for example? Is it a lack of knowledge, or is it a lack of investment in AI teams at your customers?
One thing I would say is that the big tech companies are in so much need of AI engineers that they are paying really high salaries to AI engineers, right? So I think it's difficult, frankly, for a climate startup or any startup for that matter to attract and hire AI engineers, right? And I think that in our case, or I think probably in the case of all of you guys, having an important mission is one of the things that we use to attract those engineers. But AI is so used on every industry today, right? That every company is looking for machine learning engineers or software engineers that are training on AI. So I think that the talent is one of the barriers that I see, so that we would have more startups and more organizations applying AI for climate.
That's a +1 for me on that, on the lack of engineers, and we're recruiting. So look at our website if you're looking for a job, please.
Well, I have a different view. I think a company like a climate startup, like the four of us, attracts, this is my experience, but attracts very talented people, even in AI. So that has not been an issue yet at Carbometrics. That we see really people and more looking for purpose in what they do. They prefer to use their expertise to help mitigate climate change rather than do algorithms that make people click on ads. So I see this trend. I hope it will continue. Of course, we cannot match the salaries of the big tech companies, but I think we have a mission and people are looking for missions.
And I was thinking as well on the side of basically of companies that are going to be your customers tomorrow. And in that sense, I have the same question that Alex Goff, that is among us. You depend or also on your customers and the company's commitment to address climate change. And is there an issue of adoption of all the latest AI solution that you guys provide to them, and can it impact your progress towards scalability? Are your customers ready to use your tools? Are they committed enough? And how do you project yourself? You raising money? So I get, of course, you can tell us your confidence, but it's a challenge because, yeah, you highly depend on their commitment to move in the right direction.
Yeah, I think that we're definitely in a phase of early adopters. I think there are within companies people committed to climate change, people committed to having a responsible climate-facing company. We're probably still in early adopters phase, and I would love to see this trend continue and grow to become like truly mainstream, where it is a core focus of every company to be climate sustainable, climate aware, and I think it's going in that direction. I would love to accelerate it. I think chats, discussions help. And I forgot the other part of the question, but at least in terms of the ability for policymakers within companies to adapt, they are, and I think it's going to grow.
My take on that is there are really powerful levers today to change things. The first one is regulation, and I think Europe is pushing a lot on regulation, on transparency, on so regulation for me is the most powerful lever, because companies are on short term, governments are on 5-year term, so regulation are really the long-term view. And thanks, Michal, for tackling this and giving transparency on that. And the second lever is society growing awareness on climate change. You know, I would like to, you know, I believe this is also a great lever. So transparency again, and making people see what's happening and what counts and what are the true action to do to reduce emissions. Yeah. So yeah, I have a lot of hope.
I'll throw in a last sentence. I'm obviously biased about regulation and how important it is, but I'll throw in an unexpected actor into here, and that is institutional investors in general, but institutional investors in particular. A lot of them are starting to be systemically concerned about how do they pay back the people whose pensions they hold, for example, in 30 or 40 years. So their investments need to be climate sustainable, because climate change will mess up the entire system that they're counting on its stability. So you can see coalitions of institutional investors moving together today to do what's called, or what I call quasi-regulatory efforts. So to set standards for companies, to set industry standards for anything from target setting to lobbying practices, and putting those out in the public domain as well is also important. And a shout out to Climate Action 100 Plus, that holds about half of the world's traded wealth, who are doing some open access data on the world's largest emitters in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for those thoughts there. So while so far the conversation's focused on the ways that AI can help address climate change, there are also lots of, challenges or pitfalls that are often faced in this space. So for example, AI being used in ways that actually accelerate climate change happening, like accelerating oil and gas extraction, or considerations like, while many AI models are small, some of the cutting edge ones are very large, which comes with an energy footprint and also means that not all players can actually access the development and running of these models. So it may exacerbate the digital divide. Or since AI is very flashy, sometimes there's a maybe fear that AI work in this area will maybe distract or take money away from work that is less flashy, but also equally impactful. So I think there are lots of pitfalls and challenges to navigate in this space. And maybe briefly, I wanted to ask how each of you maybe addresses these kinds of issues in your work.
Well, we for Carbometrics, we are not running a large algorithm yet. It's still manageable. But in the way, we eat our own dog food, like we say. We want to reduce our emissions. So every choice we make, we try to make it, the best for the climate. So when we select our cloud provider, we select the one that is less emissive. when we buy computers, we try to use, second-hand computers. And so we know the levers to reduce our emissions. So that's what we do on our scale, and I can give you all kinds of hints on how you can do it on your company too.
I want to give a fairly broad answer, and it's not just about what we're doing, because I think that would be arrogant of me to do, because we're just starting, but we do hope to run huge models. So first of all, let's hire great engineers so we run efficient models, right? So we don't be wasteful on those. That's a part of the story. That's true always for energy. Always plan in an energy efficient way, and a lot of the emissions will be gone to start with. But I think it speaks to a broader responsibility on the footprint of AI, in terms of not only doing our thing and making sure that our work is done in an efficient way, but also being advocates for larger systemic changes, pushing for more renewable electricity to be available. So we are not just corporates, we are citizens. And as citizens, we have a real responsibility to participate in collective action and drive the climate agenda forward on all fronts. So that's on our footprint, and and AI will be a driver of increased electricity use, and we need to make sure that that's sustainable. But there are other ethical considerations which are really, really critical to I think to address when we talk about AI. AI can be utopian and can be dystopian, and we really need to make sure that our modeling doesn't build in biases that will bring dystopia. Sorry for using these big words, but I really think this is where we're going, because AI has a huge potential. And even as we're all starting, and we're all fairly new in our, we're all less than 5 years old. I think I think that's who we are. The way that AI is exploding means that if we don't build in the ethical considerations now into the way that our natural language processing works, and those can be biased. Think about automatic translation and how people can be excluded from that, and how solutions can be excluded, and how measuring things across different cultures and across different things can create inherent bias that then really has problems. Think about immigration, immigration requests that are rejected because Google Translate is used to translate them, and the bias there isn't working. So it is critical actually to address these larger ethical considerations, because otherwise we would be at a risk of doing real damage from a climate perspective, and opening that conversation up and addressing those things as soon as possible is critical. I don't know that anyone knows how to have these conversations properly yet. I'm inviting anyone who wants to have these conversations, especially around NLP and especially around NLP on policy documents, to reach out, and we'll put something together and we'll have those conversations. And yeah, that's it for me for now.
Loved your comment and wanted to build on it, that it's not just NLP, like CNNs can have biases too. You'd be surprised how many crop detection models, different algorithms are built specifically in North America, where like the data is rich, and where you can actually get your training data, and then you try to apply it to like maybe less data rich environments, say like Latin America, and suddenly all of these like North American biases get transported across to different continents. And they fail because the fundamental data where they were trained is not the same data as where they're used. And I think that these fears or fundamental problems of climate AI are really important, and glad you brought them up. At least one of the tools that we have on our disposal is transparency and good communication. So I think we really need to move away from the age of black box AI and really move into a fully transparent, ideally shared code, ideally easy to read with good documentation, where people can understand what's being done, why it's being done, what are the shortcomings, what are the strengths. And actually it is this transparency in AI that will safeguard the reputation, the trustworthiness, the credibility of AI moving forward, and it's important. It's key for us, and we want to spread it as much as possible.
Was super fast. I know this was.
Those are really good points that I second. In our case, we brought a facilitator, a guy called Lyle Resner, who works at the New York University on ethical implications of technology, and he facilitated a session for our team to think about the unintended consequences of what we're doing. Because even if you are actually, having really, really good intentions, you're right, Maja, that there are things that can go wrong, right? And in our case, we are, interacting, or our insights might have an impact with ecosystems, right? And if we don't consider every possible thing that can go wrong, the ethical implications are high. So I think that super, super important. I thought, and this is an idea that I would like to share with you guys. I thought of proposing a climate tech ethical oath, the same way that doctors have an ethical oath. So if you're going to build a climate tech startup, you have to sign this, right? And where we could, put a list of tenets that, we all commit to, because this is not just about clicking on ads, which also can go terribly wrong, as we have seen with Facebook and other things. But here we're talking about ecosystems, we're talking about the planet. So anyways, I just throw this idea there.
That's really a great idea. We should definitely work on it, and with Climate Change AI and the Good AI, Diego. Thanks so much for all your answers. I think we have a few minutes left, and we have so many questions from the attendees. So I suggest we go and check them. If any one of you has a hot stop in 3 or 4 minutes, let us know, and we can start with you guys. Otherwise, so I will take the question in the order. There is one question from Arif Sem Gundogan. Sorry if I pronounce not well. And this question is for Michal. So there is 3 parts in the question. So this is.
Let me summarize it. How do we address multiple languages? Because they're, we're a global operation. How do we do this? The answer is we start from nothing. We move to something. We move to good enough. And we move to best practice. So in practical terms, we're going to start from English language documents, and on top of them apply automatic translation, which are clearly not good enough. We will then move on to either another language, and from there to multi-language models. And we will start with those languages that have the maximum impact. So the most countries, the most emissions, the most need of resilience and adaptation efforts. So selecting those, and in special cases, obviously apply and build or apply and use specific language models. I don't think there's a one catch-all, but we're going to start somewhere. I think with 5 or 6 languages, we're going to get a fairly large coverage, given that the world speaks not too many languages in terms of its official documentation, right? I'm saying official documentation. There are thousands of languages spoken in India, but documents are in Hindi and English primarily, at least in the national and subnational levels. So we can get quite far with that. But Arif, let's talk about that, and happy to hear your experience, and we can share notes.
Carolyn, you're muted.
Well, I'm muting, but I guess you can move with the question, Corinne. So it's a question from Diego. Is your funding coming mainly from clients, or you got access to other kind of fundings as well?
So I presume it's financing of the company. So for the moment, we are self-funded, and we have grants, and we'll be raising funds soon. So,
and we wish you all the best.
Yeah.
A question from Adrian for Diego. Does your solution could finance ongoing reforestation project, or is it only after project funding? How is your methodology validated by international carbon certifiers?
Yeah, so definitely we are working on creating some solution to finance reforestation projects in advance of getting carbon credits, right? Because there's a gap of time between the moment that you have to secure the land, prepare the soil, plant the trees, and the moment that you can actually claim the carbon sequestration of those trees growing. But because we have the data, we have a lot of connections to financing institutions, and we have the connections to the landowners. We could be the connector of these parts. In terms of our methodology, we actually work closely with organizations such as Vera, Climate Action Reserve, and other carbon certification bodies. And we build tools that are aligned with the protocols and methodologies that already exist for carbon issuance of credits. We're also working on a new protocol based on remote sensing alone, but building on what already exists in the market.
Awesome, thanks, Diego. So we have a next question from the audience for Max, which is, what climate models do you use?
So ideally, on global scales, the CMIP6 models, those are really nice to use. Where available, you do, and for regional areas, you want to go for the regional downscaled versions, think like Cordex models. Most of those done over the CMIP5 at this point. Generally, you can use the future projections. You can use the industrial control or historical data, and those are great sort of like data sets that have very, very long tracks of how the climate will function under different scenarios and capture some of those physics.
Awesome, thanks, Max. Next question for Diego. Is your methodology also taking into consideration biodiversity, soils, species, etc.?
Yeah, so as I said, we work with the methodologies that already exist that do check for biodiversity and community and social impacts. We have not yet built remote sensing AI models to do that, but it is possible, and it's something we're super interested in applying AI to determine biodiversity indexes on forest. What we can do today is determine species types, deciduous and non-deciduous trees, but there's a lot of cool stuff that can be done with biodiversity. So there's some groups out there that are working on that, but we're still focused in the hairy problem of carbon.
Awesome. And staying with you for a second, we talked about funding for example, your own companies, et cetera, but thinking about funding for stakeholders. This questioner would love to hear your thoughts about making funding available directly to smallholder farmers in order to incentivize ecosystem protection and reforestation.
Yeah, so in fact, one of the problems of forest carbon markets in the past is that it was so bureaucratic and expensive and slow to go through a certification that only large landowners or large projects could actually do it. And in a way, small landowners were left out. So we think that the technologies that we're building, in a way, lower the barriers to entry. And we can build tools that make it super easy for landowners to come together independently and create accounts with us. And we take care of all the complexity and aggregate a project. So that's part of the vision, is democratizing access to carbon markets to small landowners.
Caroline, you're muted.
Again, sorry. We have a pretty long question from Saeed Motevalian for Corinne. So I don't know if you have read all the thread already, Corinne. I'm putting
Yes.
here quite quickly so people can read, but you can start answering, I guess.
Yes, so thanks, Sayed, for your question. It's related to a ranking that we've published on our website, where we rank automakers based on their carbon performance. And so his question, what is about the methodology and how we make sure there is no greenwashing from the company. So basically, the method we've used is not to rely on company self-reported data. Basically, we aggregated data that are not emissions data, sales data of models, country by country, brands by brands, companies by companies. Other source of data for the specification of each models of cars, and aggregating all this data make a homogeneous comparison of each and every automaker. So we've covered 99% of cars sold worldwide, and we were able to rank companies based on their emission and intensity. So it's not, we don't rely company reporting, because they are very different in the way they count their emissions. So we do our own assessment based on asset-based data.
Thanks so much, Corinne. We're running out of time, but if you guys want to answer a last question, just let me know which one, and I can show it, and then we'll move to the conclusion. Is there any question? Because there is so much more. Anyone in particular? Nope.
I had just one question from Adrien regarding if we provide advice to companies to reduce their emissions. Basically, we give the raw data on their carbon footprint and the largest category of emission, and then it's up to them to act on these categories. We can partner, with consultants that do that. And the power of our solution is that you stop spending time of counting stuff. You spend time of acting on what counts.
Thanks so much, Corinne. And I think this will be our last answer for today. I want to thank all of you so much for your time and for such an interesting and inspiring conversation. Thanks as well to all the attendees for joining, fooling our conversation with your great questions to our guests. Maybe Priya, you want to add a few words?
Yeah, again, thank you so much, and to all the panelists for these awesome insights. And to the audience, it seems like there are very many calls for action that emerged. For example, a number of them are hiring. Lots of calls for action to also reach out and talk about issues related to ethics, equity, bias in AI, in order to make sure that we sort of approach this landscape fundamentally in a way that does not exacerbate existing inequities, but instead tries to address and subvert them. And then also for those who are interested in working in this area of climate change AI, or who already are, and would like to continue the conversation, please do join into the climate change AI community to find some fun collaborators and really great work from the community going on there.
And I want to add really shortly that listening to all of you, it seems that there is perhaps no AI application that matters more for humanity than decarbonizing the atmosphere and slowing climate change, without mentioning the opportunity for economic and societal value. And so I really think it's hard to imagine a more worthy field for AI entrepreneurs, researchers, and any other stakeholders to devote themselves in the decades ahead. So again, thanks to everyone. Thanks to all of our guests, Diego, Corinne, Michal, Priya. Max had to leave. I also invite all of you attendees to follow the Good AI on LinkedIn and subscribe to our newsletter so you get noticed about our next events. And this said, I wish you a nice evening and a nice day for, I guess, Diego and Priya that are overseas. And thanks so much to all of our attendees. Bye-bye. Thank you.